and welcome to the My Clayco studio. My name is Carla and today I have a really fun project for us to do, and it's one that I've wanted to do for a while now on the channel, and that is to make a fairy house using polymer clay. Now, one of our kiddos is most likely getting visited by the tooth fairy this week, so it's the perfect time for me to do this project so that I can create a fun little fairy house to pop in his room. All right, let's get started. So before we get into the actual creating, I thought I would just touch on your basic supplies. So when you make a fairy house, it's generally wrapped around a form. So I've just got a old pesto jar. You want to make sure that you have like a little jar, unless you want to use a lot of polymer clay to cover this one, because we will be wrapping polymer clay around the entirety of it. So this one isn't too big and it's not too small. I would have preferred a smaller one, but I wanted to demonstrate with this dip in it on how you can infill in case you have an odd shaped jar. But yes, that's important to have some kind of form to actually build the polymer clay around. And of course, that means we need polymer clay. You can use air dry clay as well. However, air dry clay does shrink a little bit when it dries. So if you wrap it around your form, just know that if it shrinks, it's more prone to cracking. So I would suggest doing it on something like a cardboard or plastic form so that it might have a little bit more give than say a glass form. But you can always get a air dry clay such as DAS that has minimal shrinkage and you can test it out. It's just, I would hate for you to build it out and then it crack. That would be unfortunate. So just something to make note of. Now for the embellishments such as doors and windows, I am actually going to be using a door cutter today, but I will show you how to sculpt the windows just so you have the two options, because if you don't have the cutters, you can just use your handy craft knife and sculpt the rest of it. All right, that's the basic supplies. I'll go through more of the tools throughout the video, but let's get creating. So the fairy house that I'm going to be making today, I'm actually going to be making kind of like a little mushroom fairy house. I'm just going to have my reference off to the side so that if ever I need it, this can be an actual little figurine or an image. I find it nice and easy to go, oh, yep, that's what I have to do next, or just my process of creating. So I'll pop that one over to the side. But the first thing that we're going to do is not work on the actual house itself. We're going to do the lid. So the lid for this one, because I'm doing a mushroom house, is going to be the mushroom top. So I have actually got my red all rolled out, and I'm going to be using just a circle cutter. Now, if you didn't have the cutter, again, you could trace around a bowl just with a craft knife. So it's super simple to do. And my form that I'm going to do is, I have this scrap clay that I actually baked using a bowl, and I'm going to flip it so that once I've cut out my mushroom top, I can actually rest it on here and I can sculpt out the top of my mushroom so that my pretty beautiful side isn't going to be sitting in a bowl to get that form. It's actually going to be cupped. Now, if you didn't have scrap clay or anything to make this form, you could actually build this out of alfoil, or if you have a bowl that has a smooth top, then you could just place it on the top there. All right, so let's move that to the side and get cutting. So I have my little mushroom top here now, and I've just lightly put it onto my form, and as you saw, I dusted it with that corn flour just so that it's easier to release from my form piece. But now we get to do the fun part of actually creating a really nice mushroom top. So I'm just going to use some soft pastels to actually do some color differentiation on the top here, and then add some little white spots. And then that one is ready to bake. So I've coloured the top of my mushroom so that it's not bright red anymore, which is fine if you want to do a more like cartoony style. I'm leaning a little bit more into realism, so I've just discoloured the outside, but because I use those soft pastels on it, I can't just put unbaked clay onto this because it might not adhere very well. So I'm just going to put some little spots of oven baked clay adhesive on the top so that my white clay is going to stick in those places. Okay, so I've completed the top of my fairy house now. I'm going to bake it like this, and then when we come back, we're going to attach it to the lid. Okay, so I now have my top separated from the form, and what I am going to do is I'm now going to attach this to the lid. So we have our lid here, and this is going to be sitting inside. So what I want to do is just attach it on the inside with some more polymer clay. So because my mushroom is this buttercream colour that I've then discoloured with my new pastels, I'm going to take my buttercream scraps and I'm going to infill here so that I can create these kind of mushroom gills. Now because this is baked clay and unbaked clay, I want to make sure that I'm actually putting oven baked clay adhesive on the inside when I'm pressing this in. So I've got this one completely infilled now, and I just went around and I tidied up any edges just to make sure I didn't have any clay overhang there. And all I'm going to do now is texture under here. And to do that, I'm going to take my handy dandy rake tool. I don't know what you call this one, but I've heard a few people call it a rake, and that's a fun name, so let's go with that. And all I'm going to be doing is just dragging along, trying to create those gills. Now I'm going to tidy this up a little bit and make them a little bit more pronounced, but this is just to get that kind of effect started. Okay, I've got that one textured up now. I'm just running my finger over to get rid of any of that excess clay that's come off. And you can see now that that's got that lovely kind of gilled texture underneath. And then I'm going to do what I did with the actual body of the mushroom, and I'm just going to lightly colour over that with some new pastel. Okay, and now we have that kind of mushroom gilling underneath, and it's all discoloured with that new pastel, so it really shows off that texturing. So we do have to rebake this because we have got unbaked clay in here. So I've got my mushroom cap here, and as you can see underneath we've got our lovely little gills. Now unless you go over the edge of this jar lid, which I don't like doing because sometimes it can mess with closing the jar lid, it's not going to adhere. You can see here it's like pulling away. That's fine. What I normally do is just take it out. It's still hot because I just pulled it out the oven. So I take it out and I'm actually going to put glue in here and then glue that in so that I know that it's super secure. If I was to put clay all around here and in a sense embed it, this might swivel within the embedding, so it's not actually going to work as a jar lid. So I find the easiest way is to actually properly secure it by filling this with some super glue and then popping it in. The alternative is you can discard that jar lid and you can just sit this on your jar. It will have a little bit of wiggle room because obviously we had to allow for the jar lid, but it's not that big a difference. So if you did want it to just be a full glass and polymer clay piece without the metal lid, or say if you're doing one with a cork lid, you can always take that out and just have the polymer clay. I'm going to glue this one in. Okay, so now we're going to get started on the base jar, and I just wanted to show you how to infill any indents. If you didn't want to have this big divot in here, you can actually just take a strip of clay and just pop it in the gap here and then just smooth it over. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just so that is infilled. So now you can see the edge is a little bit straighter. So now when we get our clay that we're going to wrap, I haven't done this one too thin. I've probably got it about 1.5 millimeters, just because the thinner you have your clay, the more like divots and everything it's going to show, but we don't want it to be too thick because then we're using too much clay. So all I do is I'm just going to drape it just so that it's covering my jar, but know that we're going to cut some of the top off to allow for the lid to go on, and I'm also going to cover the bottom a little bit, so it doesn't need to be perfect here. I'm just smoothing as I go. We are going to texture this anyway to create a little bit more detailing, so it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. But if you are looking for perfectly smooth, then I would suggest rolling on your surface to help really make sure that it's really nice and tight and smooth. Once you get to the area where it will join, I just cut off my excess. And then I'm going to smooth that out. Okay, then up here, I'm just going to cut off the excess. Okay, so now we have our jar completely covered. Now I am going to do some texturing of the jar, just so that it's a little bit more like a mushroom stalk. But you just want to go through and just make sure that there aren't any big bubbles or anything under your clay surface. And if there are, you just want to try and push them out from underneath the clay. Otherwise, those bubbles will appear in your baked piece. If you get any blemishes or anything like this on it, you can always use that as placement of your door or windows or anything that you can stick over it. So I'm not going to bother cleaning this up because I'm actually going to pop my door over that. But all I'm going to do is just texture the outside. You can do this with any kind of texture. I'm just going to grab a ball tool and kind of run down and along it. So you can see now it's got much more of a kind of mushroom texture on the bottom, and that was just very simply running that texture tool over it. I am going to use my soft pastels just to discolor this one slightly. As you can see on my little miniature, I've done the same thing, just trying to really make those details pop. And I'm going to get going on that one. So this one is all textured and colored. So what I'm going to do now is grab my door cutter, or if you're using a craft knife, you would use a craft knife. And I'm simply just going to kind of figure out where I want my door to go. And then I'm going to lightly imprint it, because then I'm actually going to cut out a little bit of a space so that I can pop this one on. And now we grab our craft knife and we just cut that one out. Now you can just layer your door on top, but I kind of want this sitting a little bit more flush in here. So that's why I've cut it out, and I'm just leaving that raised bit in there just so that I'm still having that nice flat surface there. So now that we've got our cutout for the door, I'm just going to do the same for the windows. Now I am going to be sculpting these windows by hand, not using a standard cutter. So you can go in and just cut the shape out with your knife, or you can just use something to help guide you. So I'm going to just use this little circle to guide me. All right, so we have our door and windows cut out of that one. Now you could put windows anywhere you wanted. You could even have something on the back. I'm just going to leave it as that. And now I'm going to actually start constructing my doors and windows so that I can then move the pieces onto here. So I actually have here some Cernit granite clay because my cutter has this kind of stone outside. So I'm going to make a stone effect. And I do actually have a concrete texture mat that I'm going to put on here to get some texture, but you could also use sandpaper or even get a little ball of alfoil and actually roll this over the surface. I'm just going to use the texture mat because I have one here. So you can see that's really nice and textured now. And all I have to do is stamp out my cutter. Now I don't actually want my door to be this stone color, so I'm actually going to cut this piece out and I'm going to make a faux wood so that my door can be a little wooden door. And I'm just going to color these ones with my new pastels as I go. I'll just show you a tip. If you ever use your soft pastels and overcolor an area, you can simply take a baby wipe and wipe away some of the surface, and that'll take any excess off. Okay, so we've got the outline of that one. I am going to make sure that the edges are also colored. And then I'm going to move on to my windows so that I can do the same stone texture before I move into getting my wood texture pieces out. So I have to do the windows now, and I said that I would actually sculpt them instead of using an actual window cutter. So I'm going to be making circle windows, and even though I'm using a circle cutter, you can still do this by hand cutting too. I'm just going to use the scraps that I have from making the door though, just so that I get the same stone texture. And I'm just going to cut out 2 circles. This is going to be the basis of my window. Now I'm going to show you a quick tip with making circles to have like a stone outline. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the back of a blade here to actually imprint. And all you want to do is just find the cross sections and press into them just at equal sections. I might do this one into 3. And it doesn't matter if they're not perfect because we kind of want this to be a little bit of a different looking stone, so they don't all have to be perfect. It's like someone has cobbled them. So now that I've got all of those imprinted, you can see that it kind of spirals out. Now if I was to actually cut out another circle from the center of this, so if I get a smaller circle cutter or if I cut it by hand, and all I want to do is line this one up so it's kind of in the center. So I've got equal amounts of that stone around, and then just cut it out. You can see now that it's a perfect little stone round. And I'm going to do this other one and then I'll color them up with my pastels and then we can pop them on. Okay, so those ones are done. Now, if you wanted to have these just as porthole type windows, you would leave them like this. I am actually going to just put a couple of wooden crosses in the center here before I move them over to my piece. So faux wood grain is really easy to do. I've just got a nice kind of lightish brown piece of clay here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a darker brown Nu Pastel and I'm just going to scrape over the top. Now, because my wood grain is going to be going this way, and that's where I'm stamping it, I'm going to move my finger in the direction of that wood grain. And you can see here that it's really nicely discolored that to make it look a little bit more splotchy like wood grain would be. And then this is the secret weapon. It is almost like you're having, 5 to 6 needle tools all in one go. And you just drag along the surface in the same direction as your wood grain. I think I'm going to do this one quite thick because I want it to be kind of quite gnarled, almost like it's been outside and weathered for a long time. So just really working in that wood grain. And as you can see there, that's really nicely textured. And all we have to do now is cut out our door. Now we don't need to have it go the whole way because we're just going to be using this door part. So I just make sure that I've got that centered. And then I do the same as before and I just cut that little part out. Alrighty, so now I've got the inside and the outside. So all I have to do is connect to the two. So I'm actually going to move the outside to the inside rather than trying to drop this in and it be a little bit awkward. It's going to be much easier for me to put this on the outside and then push it in where I need it. And I just want to make sure that I'm pressing them in together so that they're nice and connected so that when I move it now, it comes as one piece. And then all I have to do is take my jar and I'm just going to fit that into that gap that I have. And as you can see now, we've got a beautiful door on there. All right, I've got all of my window pieces. So now all I'm going to do is just grab these kind of crossbars and I'm going to pop these on first. So now that I've got those on there, I could just put my stone on top, but I want to make sure that it sits nice and flush. So I'm just going to remove a little bit of each of these just by coming in with my craft knife so that I have somewhere to put my stone. Okay, now that I've got the outsides just removed, I can now move my stone in. And you just want to make sure that you clean up the edges a little bit here so that you don't have to do it once they're on. And I'm just going to hold it and pop it in. And now you can see we have our 2 windows and our door all done. So I have the clay for my skirt, but this is actually going to be the very last step I do before I bake it. So I'm just popping it to the side because I wanted to show you something that you can do, which is to just put a little bit of like moss or greenery around the bottom here. Now I'm only going to be putting it around the base, but if you wanted to, this is now the time that you could actually cut out a circle and kind of create like a base for your piece. So I've just done a really crude circle on the bottom out of my green, and all I'm going to be doing is just sticking that one underneath and kind of pressing it into where my moss line will be. And all I'm going to be doing then is just hiding the seam between my mushroom and this green space, just with that moss coverage that I'm doing. This is a really simple, easy way to cover the base without actually having to have a visible seam anywhere, just by covering it with some of that greenery. And now I'm just going in underneath all of that moss, and I'm adding in extra greenery so that I can just taper it out and texture it on the actual finished piece, just so that I have a nice seamless base here and I don't have any risk of the piece wobbling over once it's all done. And just to get that final texturing, I can again go around with my kind of rake tool and just scuff it up so that I'm getting some nice texture all on my moss. If you see any gaps, you can just fill it with some more clay. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that one now. I've got a really nice moss base, and I'm just checking underneath. I might just cut some of this excess just to make sure that it's going to sit nice and flush. But otherwise, that one is ready for us to put our little skirt on. So I'm going to make this one. I've got my strip, and I'm just going to show you, I've got it flipped around the other way. So this is the side that's going to be facing outwards. I just want to texture the bottom of this, because as you can see here on my little display mushroom, it's kind of nice when it's not all perfect and it's got little tears in it. And I find a really simple way to do that is to take my rake tool, or even if you use a needle tool or something like that, and I just want to scuff up the edges, not perfectly everywhere, just enough so that the edges are a little bit tattered. And what this does when I flip it over, it means it's got that nice kind of frayed edge, but we're not seeing any of the actual work that we've done underneath because it's going to be flipped this way. Now, another thing that you can do when it's this way is we can actually texture it and color it first before we attach it. So I'm just going to take a silicone tool and I'm just going to roughly and very randomly drag it across here. Then I'm just going to create a couple of cuts in here so that it has a natural space for it to actually fan out. And then I'm just going to use my new pastels to discolor it. Okay, so now I have my skirt. I'm just going to pull my jar over and I'm actually going to flip it upside down so that when I attach my skirt, I'm going to bake it this way so that those pieces can actually use gravity and curl up. If I was to sit it this way when I bake it and I put the skirt on, it would just flatten for the first little bit in the oven. I want to make sure that it's kind of coming up. So I'll be baking it upside down. So let's just put this skirt on. Okay, so I've got that skirt on now, and if you think that it needs a little bit more discoloration, you can go in and do that and also get some of these underparts as well, because we don't have much texture on there, but you're not really going to see it, but you might see a little bit of it, you know, not being that nice brown color. So I'm just going to load up my brush, do one final pass, and then I'm going to bake it skirt side down. I'm also just going in at the bottom before I bake it, just to add a little bit of that darker brown into the moss, just so it's not all one tone and it gets a little bit of depth. Okay, but otherwise that one is all done. I don't have a doorknob for this, so I'm just going to stick a little golden caviar bead on here, and then I can pop that one in the oven to bake, and then we can see the final product. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video today and that it has inspired you to make your very own fairy house, whether it's just as a little decor piece for your backyard or inside your home, or for something special like a tooth fairy visit. If you did have any questions about the video or any suggestions for other polymer clay artists in the community, don't forget you can always pop a comment down below. If you liked the video, we would love for you to like and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time. Bye.